From Beyond Marketing, it's the 20-Minute Call, a podcast about the dreamers, boundary pushers, rebels, and champions of the skydiving industry. Each episode is a narrative journey highlighted by the highs, lows, and luck that the skydiving industry delivers, as told by the most influential people within the sport. If you've ever dreamed of becoming a skydiver, perhaps opening a drop zone, or becoming the next world champion, check out the 20-Minute Call hosted by me, James LeBarry. My guest today is one of the most recognized skydivers and base jumpers on planet Earth. Say the word JayMo in any skydiving community, and they know you're referring to Jason Moledzki. Since making his first static line jump from a Cessna 182 at Skydive Toronto in 1994, Jason has amassed an unparalleled resume that includes 7 world titles, 11 world records, and over 60 gold medals in canopy piloting. Jason is a foundational member of the PD Factory team, a co-founder of Flight 1, which is the quintessential gold standard in the sport for canopy training for the military and civilian jumpers alike. And he has literally traveled the world because of skydiving. Jason has amassed more than 1,400 base jumps and has been featured in multiple documentaries, including the most recent and awe-inspiring film Fly, currently on Hulu. Jason is also the co-host of the podcast Trust the Journey with Melanie Curtis. He is also an artist, a self-mastery coach, and an entrepreneur, which includes his latest business venture, Paraglide Moab. Jason has lived multiple lives in just 50 years, and those experiences have shaped him as a man with infinite wisdom, from how to be a peak performer to helping others live more full and present lives. I'm honored to welcome Jason Moledzki to the 20-Minute Call podcast. Jason, welcome.
Thanks for having me, James.
Jason, it's an honor. And before we begin, I just want to say that I have such admiration for you, not necessarily because of your skydiving achievements, but more from what I've learned about you in preparation for our interview today. You strike me as someone who is comfortable in their own skin and comfortable with being vulnerable, which I find to be courageous. So I don't know how.
Thank you.
Either you're fooling me or I'm onto something there.
Yeah, I think a lot of us mistakenly view vulnerability as a weakness, and what I've come to learn is it's actually a strength.
So I'm keen to dig in and learn your evolution from a kid who learned really through a school of hard knocks for being the person you are today. Like, there's so much life in between those two bookends. And I kind of want to, and pardon the pun, parachute into Jason Moledzki, age 21, where I think you have a crossroads moment. But for our listeners who are unfamiliar with your journey, would you mind sharing some of the struggles that you had to overcome in your youth?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. It's actually a really big part of my everyday these days, is to be open with a lot of the pain points and the struggles that drove a lot of the decision making in my life, and has brought me a lot of joy, happiness, reflection, deeper understanding of myself. You know, really, you described me as being comfortable in my own skin. I wouldn't say that was always the case. So, prior to 21 years old, adolescence, childhood, went through a lot of traumatic events. I lost both of my parents before becoming a teenager. And in my early teens, my best friend attempted suicide. In my later teens, I became a father. And after only a few years of being a father, I found out that it wasn't my child. And I had that child then removed from my life. A lot of pain and a lot of loss as a very young boy, really not even a man yet. And a lot of anger and just frustration at the world as a result. Really just pissed off at God is a great way to say it. Just looking at the script of the movie and going, what in the hell? Whose story is this? How can this possibly be my life? Like, what did I do to deserve this? I was heavily leaning on alcohol and drugs throughout my teenage years to quench some of that fire and to help calm the system. And living a blue collar life, working in the trades. I come from no money, from a very, very poor sector of upper middle class America, Canada, single mother who was raising us on government allowance, and disability. I had to cut my own path, and I was striking out through the world and just really not enjoying what I was finding. I could, quote, have a good time if you put me on my motorcycle, or get drunk or get high and be silly and, take a lot of unnecessary risks. But I was basically just grinding through life with my head down and just shaking my head with just this really, what in the fuck is going on here? Pardon my French, but I was in my boss's office for one of the many times that he called me into his office for poor behavior. Showing up late was a regular part of my being. And he had a picture of him on the wall in the classic, 8x10 photograph, film photography. And he's stepping off the strut of a 182 Cessna airplane and doing a static line jump. And I remember staring at that picture and thinking, that looks crazy. That looks super dangerous. Like, this is the mid 90s, 1994. And I'm up for it. I'm up for it. And I have to say is a few years earlier, a friend offered me to go for a skydive and I turned him down flat. I'm like, my uncle has a place. Come on, let's go. And I'm like, no, not interested. But after losing my daughter, I had hit a new low and I wanted to feel something other than pain and anger. And skydiving as a medicine is fantastic, as is base jumping or paragliding or any other adventure sports, which will reset brain chemistry, whether you like it or not, right? Like when we put ourselves into a situation where our life is suddenly at risk, new endorphins come up, adrenaline spikes, epinephrine spikes, dopamine spikes, serotonin spikes. And I opened my parachute from that very first jump, completely rewrote the script. I left the airplane ready, set, die, thinking this is the dumbest thing ever, roll the dice, who knows what's going to happen. And when the parachute opened, I was like, I am alive. And my eyes opened up and I felt chemicals I hadn't felt. I felt sharpness. I felt alertness. I felt just joy for life. And it was the defining moment of my life. Left hand 90-degree turn in my trajectory. And I was back the next weekend. And I was back the next weekend and back the next weekend.
Have you ever given any thought to what if you hadn't seen that picture on the wall? Where would you be?
I mean, there's a really good chance that the combination of the alcohol abuse, the reckless driving, and the expression of anger through very unchecked, youthful behaviors. I could easily be wrapped around a pole. I wrapped a bike around a pole when I was about 17, motorcycle. That there's a high likelihood of be, living a blue collar life, just grinding away.
I feel like we all have people in our lives that are instrumental, in our progress as humans. And in my research of you, that boss of whom you saw a photograph really was a guy that never quit on you.
He was great. His name was Rick Sokoloff. I can remember very clearly the day when one of the days he called me into his office and said, Jay, if you come in late one more time, I'm going to fire you. Right? Because it's just all the time. And it's because I didn't care to get up in the morning. I didn't want to see life. I was like, I don't want to open my eyes. This hurts. And I remember showed up for work probably on time for like 6 months. And 6 months in a day, I walk in 20 minutes late. And I remember him just shaking his head and just given me that chance, because my quality of work was there. I had the passion, I loved to be creative, and I loved to work with really cool people and learn things. And I like the risk and the danger in the job. I just had all those other, heavy elements that I was carrying around, a lot of baggage, He was a great guy. I'm really grateful for him. He passed on some time ago, and I still keep in touch with his family. And we chat once in a while. We just chat a couple weeks ago.
Did Rick ever see what you became in skydiving years later?
Yes, he did. Yeah. And I have to say, I remember at some point I got a message from him. It wasn't quite at, having reached pinnacle of career, but at the time when I had very obviously made a name for myself in the sport of skydiving. And he basically gave me the good job, pat on the back. Nice way to walk away from the grind that I continued doing, which he loved, but to go and really chase my dreams and my passions for a completely different life.
When I try to have empathy for you at that age, it feels dark and not a lot of hope, right? Like that. I feel like hope is the glimmer that gets us out of bed at least another day. And then all of a sudden, when you describe that first jump, I imagine as if lights have been switched on, going, oh, there's something to this life. Mm-hmm. So you obviously took to it, and I'm not sure where the gap in time is, but I know that you end up going down to Florida as part of the Canadian four-way team. I'm not sure, what happens between your first jump and getting to that point, but
Sure.
Clearly you were logging a lot of jumps.
Yeah, I mean, my trajectory was really steep especially for the time and place. Mid 90s in Canada, had 100 jumps before I finished out my first season, and went to Florida that Christmas holiday to go straight from the Cessna drop zone to Roger Nelson's World Skydiving Center, where they were doing 232 ways. So I basically was baptism by fire to go from, tiny, we literally had a red barn and a grass strip, and to 13 aircraft in formation and hundreds of people coming out of the sky, and getting to meet Roger straight away and all the big names in the sport. And I just 250 jumps by the next year, 500 by the next year, just ramping like crazy.
And you would end up going down to Titusville.
So we started off with Phoenix in Zephyr Hills, where the Skydive City is nowadays, and as well as Lake Wales and Titusville and DeLand. And we chose Titusville for our training grounds for when myself and the rest of my team made the full commitment to train full time. Everybody on the team committed to putting $10,000 each into a pot. So we had $50,000, and we were committing to a 6-month block of sponsored training with a goal to do 400 jumps of four-way formation skydiving in that time, and with the ultimate goal of becoming the Canadian national team.
If you're a DZO or DZM listening to this podcast and you're not using Burble, I've got a question. Why not? If the reason is price, what's the cost of your time? Other booking and manifest softwares are a one-size-fits-all. Burble was built from the ground up by a DZO for DZOs to maximize efficiency. Now, isn't that nice? There's no software that compares. Choose Burble. Burble. What was it like being in Titusville? Because when I was a baby jumper in the early 2000s, it was like that was the hotbed for all the excitement. Brian Earler is a good friend of mine today, but back then, he was known for his photography of all the shuttle jumps and, free flies coming into being, and Olav Zipser is down there and Omar El-Hejelan. And, there's all this. As I observed skydiving, there was like it was like everything is black and white. And then in Titusville, there's full color, like immersion of life happening there. Was that the same period of when you were there?
I think there's this phenomenon in skydiving where at any one time, there's like a hot spot. There's a spot in the world that is just going off. And I got lucky with my timing for my introduction to Florida to kind of hit the hot spots that were kind of burning out a little bit with Zephyr Hills and World Skydiving Center. And then Titusville was just flaming up. And there was a guy named Pierre who owned it. And it was seemed to me like it was a money laundering operation. Like there's no way this thing turns any profit at all. And we had Vivian Wiegrath, Eric Ferday was there. And I already had Eric on the top pedestal on top of the mountain when it comes to, my competition role model in the sport. It was Eric Ferday, Rob Harris, and of course the original Airspeed crew. Those guys were the guys that I was like, these guys are my models. And I rolled in there. Orly King was there. The Swiss formation skydiving team was there. FX was there. Joey Jones, Don, Chris, Doug. So we've got these amazing 4-way role model teams to work with. We've got sky surfers to work with. We've got camera people to work with, and canopy piloting hadn't even come into existence at the time. So I nailed it with that one, or we nailed it. We got right in that lucky spot while it was in its heyday. And I'll give you a quick stories. I remember like week one, I had taught myself how to free fly based on watching some videos of Olaf in early 90s. And myself and my teammate Chris had taught ourselves from 6,000 feet from Cessnas, just after a static line dispatch. And I wanted to see if I actually knew what I was talking about. And I went to Orly and I just met him. I'm like, hey, will you do a coach jump with me and, give me some advice? And we got to the ground after the jump and he's like, you're good. Just that was it. You're good. Like there's nothing to teach you. And I felt so validated that, this like hard work that we've been doing off in the boonies where nobody can see us actually had a value, because I could totally hold my own with those guys and fly my ass off and love it. We were in the flow.
During your time at Titusville, a mentor, friend, teammate ends up going in.
Yeah, Sean Lemire.
Sean Lemire. So that was another pivotal moment for you in terms of your progression.
That was the first big one in skydiving, right? So skydiving, here's the thing of life, right? Like I had all the trauma before jumping and I'd escaped it, and I'd found this wonderful glowing life of just joy and excitement and thrill and can't wait to get up tomorrow to go do it again. Complete opposite of that grind that I didn't want to go to bed. I was at the drop zone at 7 a.m. stretching, like I was there, we were doing it. And I was an athlete. I was a gymnast when I was young. So I just took that athletic mindset right into the formation skydiving training. Sean was my role model from Skydive Toronto. He was the top dog at the drop zone. He was the guy that was doing 180 front riser turns before you'd ever seen anybody do a front riser turn. Sean was doing front riser turns. He taught me formation skydiving. I did all my initial relative work jumps with him. And harbor a guess, in my first 1,500, 1,000 of them were with him. I was his protege. And I remember the day he invited me to come and join the team with them. And he had 3,500 jumps. I had 750. I was the low man on the totem pole, and I loved it. So he was my mentor. He was my friend. He was my teammate. He was a pit bull. Just kind of looked mean and gnarly from the outside and scare the shit out of you the way he flies his parachute. But he was the biggest, softest heart you've ever seen, and just took such a great example for how to care for people. And one of the big things I've learned from Sean was watching him organize just a simple belly fly, walk up, 8 people going to do a jump. He would take the time to put everybody in the right slot for them. And if they didn't know what they needed to know to make sure that they could do the job, he would take the time to walk them through what their slot entailed and what they needed to do, and make sure that they really felt confident enough to be able to execute as a load organizer. So his jumps were almost always successful, like really successful, because he got the group into a mindset of, I can do this. We can do this. And so I'm extremely grateful to Sean for his, the role model that he set as far as being a leader and being compassionate to meeting people where they are, as well as his guidance and mentorship to me and being a teammate and a friend. And eventually he's the reason why I became a champion swooper, is because I wanted to take his legacy to the podium and basically show him what he taught me,
And of course, you'd become literally the face of canopy piloting for the better half of at least a decade.
Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned that he was a fierce looking guy. Now,
Yeah.
Jason, when I met you roughly, I guess, a year ago at PIA, I was a little intimidated by you because when I used to observe you in those early 2000 days, and, I'm just a little pup of a jumper and, trying to make my way in that space, what I observed was a hard charging, edgy guy who had a long ponytail and a shaved head on the sides and Oakley sunglasses and just winning everything. I don't recall a lot, like seeing you smile a lot.
No.
When I met you, and I remember Shannon Pilcher, who's obviously a mutual friend, I had said to Shannon in speaking with you, I'm a little nervous about meeting Jay because this is my perception. He's like, oh, your perception is misguided. But, you're very warm and have been so, we had an amazing conversation at PIA, but was my perception of you right or wrong then?
So the persona that I carried around for that time frame from, say, the millennium through 2010, 2012 area, while I was focused on becoming world champion, I made a clear decision. In the year 2000, I decided I was going to become a professional canopy pilot. Nobody had really decided that at that time. So I kind of led the charge of like, you can make this into a top of the career list item. And I made the decision to become the best canopy pilot in the world. And it meant embodying a character, and the stoicism, the goatee or the little soul patch and the Mohican ponytail, as well as the uniforms, the colors, like everything was really a choreographed show, something that I embodied a character that I needed to play in order to be able to, in my mind, fulfill the story that I was writing. So part of it had an armor to it where I was defending my vulnerabilities from my competitors, right? Where I'm like, giving off who's this hot shit dude over here kind of thing, some, dominant energy so that I could be in this character. And I can clearly remember in 2012, my first wife and I walked the Appalachian Trail, and I took a set of trimmers and took my ponytail and just scalped myself, the whole thing all at once in one big piece, and decided like, this is it, I'm taking it off. And I walked away at the height of my career. I walked away from the sport for 6 months and went and took a sabbatical and took a long, deep look inside and took off the character, shaved the head completely, let my hair be absolutely something else at the time, a dandelion, It was a relief, honestly, to let go of that character, because I didn't smile a lot. I was intentionally being defended, being guarded, being stoic. Although my career was really successful, it wasn't the happiest time in my life.
And during this time, you're on the PD Factory team, and I couldn't. The gap that I couldn't bridge is, Shannon in those days was a really conservative, squared away guy.
Yeah.
And again, please pardon me, because this is just my outside perception or judgment unfairly, because I didn't know you, we've got a real squared away, Shannon Pilcher, and then sort of this rebel without a cause. I've heard you reference Bodie in Point Break, that sort of persona.
Sure.
And going, wow, these two guys are teammates, and they seem to be, by all appearances, getting along really good. But it seemed like polar opposites of you and your teammates at that time. Is that accurate, or how did you all get along?
Oh, it's definitely oil and water sometimes, but I mean, that's what makes a great salad dressing, right? So I was definitely the odd man out in the group as far as being like uneducated. I didn't go to a finishing school. I didn't even go to high school. Right. So these guys are college graduates out of Georgia, Ian and Shannon. Right. And so they're buddies since their upbringing. They have their whole families. They have a very, American atypical story. And I'm that, Canadian kid, rebel without a cause, running loose, like to party and had a lot of anger issues and very reckless. I can remember John LeBlanc actually in the early day before being on the team. He gave me a compliment about one of my landings at a competition, and I knew who he was, and he complimented one of my landings, and I was like, okay, there we go. This is the in right here. Like I'm starting to go in the direction that I'm aiming for. But I could also at the intro to the team, we did this this kind of trials thing where I came out to Florida and we did a bunch of jumps. And I could remember being like, John was like, man, this guy better not fuck it up for me. But, he's dangerous to have in this group because I didn't fit the mold, right? Like Shannon, Ian, both blew like very proper, I feel like I could put my money behind them and I'd feel safe making the bet. But putting your money behind me meant you were taking a gamble. So we're brothers. We have different mothers. We love each other for who we are, right?
When Shannon has spoken about you to me, there's a real respect there. There's a brotherhood respect there for sure, without a doubt. Before we move forward, I'm just, again, imagining here you are with this persona that everyone that is bringing a lot of attraction. I mean, you're in every magazine there is.
Oh my God, it was crazy.
I mean, you had so much exposure, but when you get back to your trailer, your house, or wherever it is that you go at the end of a day, what does that look like? Are you exhausted with yourself, with having to maintain this persona, or are you getting lost in the persona?
Let me try to give as much value as I possibly can to the listener at this time, because this has become a really important part of my life. While I was training, when my focus was on achieving a certain goal, I was really content. I have OCD, I have ADHD, I've definitely got learning disabilities and dyslexic. I went to special ed when I was a kid, right? So during training, I was sober. I made clear decisions. I'm like, no more weed, no more alcohol, no more drugs of any kind, just game on. I want to do this because it matters to me. And I loved it. And I loved it and loved it and loved it. Now, why do I say I loved it? Well, it gave me a purpose. I felt like I had a reason to live as I was doing something that mattered to me. Does it actually matter? No, it's the dumbest thing ever. Spin, spin, swoosh. Who cares, right? Like what? Who cares? Spin, spin, swoosh. That's not helping the world, right? But to me, what it did was it got me into a meditation. It was a moving meditation where I needed to be extremely focused, and it altered my brain chemistry in a very healthy way. For the most part, okay? When I say in a healthy way is it got me to be clear-headed. I'm not drinking, smoking, being addictive by nature or trying to numb any other feelings. I had a place to put my energy, and it gave me boosts of serotonin, boosts of dopamine. But along with it came the side effects of my body going through that much just adrenaline load, cortisol load, and the fatigue and the wear and tear on the body. So during the time I was training, I loved it. During the time I was competing, it was stressful. I never liked competition. I liked winning. I didn't like competing, right? Because you put yourself at risk when you're training. It doesn't matter. You go as hard as you can. You get zeros. Doesn't matter. It's part of learning how to be better. But you get a zero in competition. All of a sudden, your version of who you are, your identity, air quotes, is at risk. It's in jeopardy. So every time I put myself up on the competition venue, I'm now at risk of my identity not being who I want it to be. Sadly, what I found was that identity was worthless to me in the end. The first time I stepped off the world championship podium, I stepped down after receiving the medal and the whole big thing. I stepped down behind the podium, and I've never felt more empty, lost, and like I had no purpose and no value in my life than I did at that moment. I was completely hollowed out. And I had no idea what to do. I'm like, what do I do now? I've spent the last 10 years of my life moving towards this moment. And now that I'm here, there's just a gaping hole on the other side. I didn't have the skill set to know what to do. So I just did it again and did it again and did it again.
Pardon the analogy. It sounds like a lonely superhero, right? Like Batman is living a quiet existence. And then he puts the costume on. He saves the day, and then he comes back home, and it's lonely and it's quiet.
Have you seen the meme of him sitting in front of the television, flicking the remote, just like... Let me say this. Parachutes make excellent emotional Band-Aids. Right? That parachute opening, when I'm alive, I lived, I made it through another one. All of a sudden, all that flood of neurochemistry washes over us, and we're good, right? We're good. We're like, I'm good. I made it. I survived. And I can go to bed that night. I get up the next day, and maybe it's a day, maybe it's a week, maybe it's a month. I go make another jump, and I'm good. The real question that you want to ask me is, what happened when I couldn't jump anymore?
Yeah, I was going to get to that. If you kept repeating and still feeling hollow and empty every time you step off the podium, what did you do? What was the next turning point?
It got more and more meaningless to me. It continued to, like, the edges just got softer and blurrier. And I'm like, yeah, I could win again. So what? The ego like steps up. I'm the best, and like wants to be like, look at me, I'm so good. And you're like, I'm the best again. I'm the best again. I'm like, eventually that song gets old. I was getting tired of it. The audience was getting tired of it. My teammates were getting tired of it. It was becoming an old story where it's like, yay, wins again. Yay, wins again. Like, what else are you going to do with your life? Just continue to go spin, spin, swoosh and get a gold medal. Spin, spin, swoosh, get a gold medal. Like, once you've got the message, hang up the phone is the analogy in the world of psychedelics, So that time frame for me personally, I started to slip and slide down the slope of depression, and the addictive behavior started to come back in. None of the pain of my youth had been healed. The emotional Band-Aid of the parachute was working every time the parachute opened. But when the parachute wasn't opening, or I'm just continuing to slap more Band-Aids on top of all this pain, it's not going to work,
If you're a fan of the 20-Minute Call, I'd like to invite you to be a member of a budding community with me on Patreon. By becoming a patron of the show, you can join me behind the scenes to discuss options for future guests and gain access to some show swag. It's pretty sweet. Details on how to become a patron can be found in the show notes. Okay, back to the show. I think the hardest thing anyone can do is look at themselves in the mirror, sober, going, I don't like what I see. I don't like the way I'm living. And here you're on top of the mountain in terms of how the community perceives you, but you feel empty. What's the moment? Is it on the Appalachian Trail cutting your hair? What's the turning point? Because there are few like you, JayMo, where we get to have such self-reflection and self-awareness to go, that's who I was and this is who I've evolved to be. Most people just spiral and continue into that dark place. What was the turning point or that moment that starts turning you away from that dark place?
It was a long, long moment. So in 2012, I took the sabbatical. That was an excellent decision. I highly recommend to anybody who's feeling like they need a break, take it. It was a really good decision to just leave the whole world behind for 6 months. Nothing fell apart. Everything was fine. I came back. What do you know? It's all still here. And I jumped back in, right? I got a new Mohawk, short, electric blue, refreshed view, new energized. I went back to training, but it still didn't feel like it was going to fix everything. It had the same coping mechanism success rate that it always had. When I'm doing it, I'm there. But as soon as I'm not doing it, I'm down. In 2014, I was in Dubai at a world meet, and I snapped the end of my turn, and my spine at the very bottom also herniated a disc, pushed right up against the spinal cord, middle of the turn. And I remember feeling it pop and the shot of electricity through all my nerves, and knowing that was it. I had already been nursing it and guarding it for ages, and I flung my hips, and all of a sudden I felt my back lock, and I'm like, okay, just land. And that was it. That was my last competition swoop, 2014. Coping mechanism gone. Now there's no more training to do. There's no more competition to do. I'm on the couch. Can walk, kind of, hobble around. I need a lot of help, maybe 20 to 30 minutes on my feet each day. Disc herniated out, pinching the spinal cord, sending severe sciatic pain. Anybody's ever had lower back pain? It's the worst ever. And this is when I started to like eat a hole in myself. It's like once I couldn't reach for the tool that I've been reaching for my whole life to manage my neurochemistry, I was now starting to reach for anything, whether that was attention, looking for people to just pay attention to me in any way, lashing out through relationships, starting to drink again, starting to use drugs again, starting to just find any way to numb the pain. Watched every single episode of Netflix of every single show that's ever existed, and went down the rabbit hole of depression and questioning life and wondering what I was doing. And I'm going to say the thing that saved my life is a friend of mine, Jamie Crawford, reaching out to me and saying, "Hey man, I think you should do ayahuasca with me." That was the pivot. I had already been spending my life exploring psychedelics, and I knew that there was answers to be found there for me. And that his reaching out and saying, "Come on, let's go do this." That's really what started the long, steady climb back up the mountain to a fresh perspective from the top.
So from that experience, would you say there was an awakening or a clarity? How would you describe that?
Yeah. I had been getting deeper and deeper into my own depression. I split up with my wife. I was hating my job and battling with my teammates and my career and having alcohol abuse problems and drug abuse problems. And the ayahuasca experience forces us into the mirror. The mirror is just ever present, and it's a loving mirror. It's nurturing. It's grandmother medicine. And that time spent with that like loving elder who wants to be there and kind of give us what we need when we need it. Maybe sometimes we just need to sit on the couch with grandma for a little bit, and that's going to really like soothe the whole nervous system, be able to sleep that night really well.
One thing that I've been trying to grasp with you is through all this time, right? You've experienced a lot of loss, and I've also heard you refer to it as actually gain from what you've gained from those we've lost. I want to share with you, I believe it was in 2016, I was on a train in Australia, and I'm on this train, and I start streaming sky flyers, sky jumpers.
Sky jumpers. I just watched it this week.
Wow. And I bawled in tears watching that.
Brutal.
And I remember being conscious of my cortisol levels just watching it. And I thought, I don't even know how those guys lived that. So while you're dealing with your past trauma, you're also going through trauma of losing close friends and Jonathan Tagle, and then nearly losing Shannon. I mean, he looked like he was on death's door. Can you just reflect, like, how did you even survive out of that?
Yeah, I mean, that whole time period, 2011 was Shannon's injury. 2012 was Jonathan's death. And for anybody who, isn't part of the base jumping community specifically, 2015, 2016 was absolutely just like it was like our people were at war. We lost so many people in our community that it was basically like you're just getting punched one after another, after another, after another, to the point of just numbness. To like, I don't feel anything. And I'm sad to say this, is I got a notification a few days ago that somebody had passed, and my emotional response was zero. Nothing. Just blip. Like, it's become so commonplace that friends are just falling off the map that there's just no more empathy, And what I want to say about that is you touched on it, was the cortisol thing, right? Is like, I found that without dosing myself daily with epinephrine, adrenaline, dopamine, I started looking for the external sources. I started looking for other ways to get those same highs. So I'd be dirt bike or surfing or doing drugs or drinking or whatever, anything to like, spike of excitement. And what I've had to learn, what I've had how to navigate this whole space is to modulate my neurochemistry has been my goal for, I'd say, maybe 7-8 years now. I've been like, how do I rebalance my brain chemistry? Because I am stuck in a trench that I've dug over decades, and developing skill sets specifically around improving neurochemistry by removing things that are causing negative effects and including things that add to positive effects, and doing tons of study around how the brain chemistry actually works, and then rearranging my entire lifestyle so that I can include all of the aspects that I've always had that I love, like training, like be out in nature, like flying, working, bring down the excitement level of things so that the spikes are not so high, so that the valleys are not so low. So I honestly, I lost my taste for it. I have to say, Shannon's accident, it left a hole in me that'll never heal. Jonathan, Gage, Jessica, Sean, Mario, these are just my teammates. That's just teammates.
Knowing of all your teammates, what I think is, wow, how does somebody endure that? And then when I watched Fly, which I would encourage everybody to watch. I felt like that was such a story of our humanity. It almost seemed like it had nothing to do with base jumping, and yet it had everything to do with base jumping. But how everyone operates in that. And I came away going, wow, the base jumping community has something that I've never seen with really anyone else, which is this visceral push-pull. There's a tension of recognizing the fragility of life, having lost so much in the endeavor of that sport, but also the awareness of how incredible life is when you do the sport, and that push-pull and that tension. And I almost saw it as a wariness. Like it's almost fatiguing when I looked at Scotty Bob in that it's a weight, but it's like, it's this gift that you have, this perspective on life that those of us that are walking around with a 9-to-5 comfort will never have. And so, but I came away from it going, is it worth it? It's so much.
Okay. This year is my 30th year base jumping, 25 years wingsuit base jumping. I've hung my wingsuit up. This year I did not take it out of the bag, did not take it off the shelf, didn't take it on any adventures. If you've seen the movie Fly, then you know that I was on the load with Jimmy when he passed, and that one was a really pivotal experience for me. I've been on lots and lots of loads where people have passed, but that was the first time where it was just me and one other person. And it was the first time it was somebody who was really close to me. We had decades of tight friendship. And I felt a sense of responsibility for not doing a better job of looking out for him. And I also felt this, maybe this is like the special kid in me, but I did the math, you know. I was like, look, 2 of us jumped, 1 of us died. What's the chances it was you? 50-50. That's a pretty shitty odds, you know? And I felt like it was inevitable that one of us was going to die, and he took a bullet. And it was a soul message from him to be like, don't die this way, Jay. And it's stayed on my heart. I mean, I feel it. It's like, it's a loving weight that's like, don't die this way, Jay. And that message has been coming to me from my loved ones, from my friends, from, you know, and having lived through this, so many people dying in the sports of base jumping, specifically wingsuit base jumping, and being somebody who's been in it for 25 years and done it. I've done all of it. I mean, that in that movie, I've jumped every single one of those places. I know every single one of those people. I know all, like, that's my life in that movie. It's their lives, but that's my life. I know all this. This is it. I start thinking, is it really worth it? And I'm like, well, you know, at a certain point in time, the medicine of that experience is invaluable. There's nothing else that could be as valuable as that experience to my life at that time. Now that I've been on the whole ride and that weight is getting heavier and heavier and heavier, to be like, if I just keep doing this, chances of it being me are pretty much 100%, you know? And I said this to a loved one just yesterday. I'm like, I think I won. Maybe the game's over, you know? It's just like a video game. I played the game. I won. Game over. I don't need to continue to do it in order to feel, in order to find the joy and happiness that I've learned how to find through those endeavors. So now paragliding is what I'm using as a tool to access the sky. And I'm happy to say, you know, in the 7 years that I've been paragliding, none of my friends have died. The fatality rate is incredibly different. Like, just the sheer number of deaths per activity is so much lower that it's a much more enjoyable activity for me, because I can go do it with my friends. And I'm like, I don't think my friend's might go in on this flight. But when I go base jumping, I'm like, there's a good chance that somebody's going to go in on this jump. I've just learned to recognize this and stepping back away and going, at 51 years old, what do I really have left to prove to myself when it comes to nylon sports? It's like, I've won it. I've done it. I've been there. I've won the game. Maybe I'll just take my victory lap and go do something else, you know, try and take those positive lessons and share them with the world in a way where they can affect others, where they can also, you know, learn to be able to see themselves and find the joy in life.
Because I'd watched Sky Jumpers, because I've been an observer of seeing many of your teammates pass on, and then when I saw Fly, I'm like, man, how much can a guy take? And then I heard an interview with you where you corrected the interviewer of, hold on, it's not loss. There's a gain here. And that perspective made so much sense to me. I wonder if you would share that for our listeners.
Yeah. So this is the everything is for us mentality, right? We have to imagine a scenario where the entire universe is created just for you, that you are ready player one, you're player one, and the whole thing is a game designed for you to figure it out. Okay. Every single obstacle, every task, every hazard, every trick, every crook, every single thing that comes along, every lover, every parent, every child, is there to try to sway you from your objective in the game, right? And the trick is we don't know what we're supposed to do. So it's like one of these mystery video games where we don't know where the treasure is or what we're trying to find, but we're just on an adventure. But there's something to be solved. Underneath it all, there's a puzzle, and we can feel it in our hearts that there's a puzzle to be solved. There's something about this where we're supposed to figure out things. And all these things are here for us to distract us or to allure us or to trap us or to kill us, all right? Or to sneak along and help us up. There's guardian angels, there's power-up points, there's, buddy-ups. There's all kinds of things, right? And I think I first started to see this relationship by being that kind of outside observer to my own life and thinking about the loss of my parents specifically. I was able to get to a point where I was able to reframe my relationship to losing my mother and father as the greatest gift that I ever received. Simply because I would not have my life at all the way that it is had they lived into old age. I would have a very normal, very blue collar, very broke, just plain old existence, So them passing on forced me into a new level of the game. I want to say one more thing about this in the sense that elevating our own consciousness, coming into more self-awareness, being able to truly recognize who we are and why we are doing the things we are doing, what's causing our emotional reactions, what's causing us to respond the way that we do or act the way that we do or feel the way that we feel, is the magic puzzle, is like getting underneath our own skin and being able to see, the great and powerful Oz behind the curtain, or the little guys operating the machine inside, the little alien inside the head who's driving the robot kind of thing. Learning to get inside of ourselves and really be able to feel into everything that we are is where that piece that you referenced earlier comes from, like just a great acceptance to it all. It only comes to that. We only come to that through the challenging lessons, the pain, the loss, the joy, all those things.
JayMo, I feel like you represent hope. Because and I don't mean that. I hope that's not received in the wrong way. But, people go through really dark times. And you have been through some dark times. And I'm very grateful for your willingness to speak about it, because as we talk about it, I see you reliving it. These deep inhales as we go back to these difficult times. And, it's not an easy conversation, but I think this is where I opened up with my admiration for you, because I am confident that there are people listening to this podcast who feel desperate, who are in a dark place, who maybe don't feel hope. And here's a guy that I'm talking to who has been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, and is on the other side of it to say, no, there is so much to this life. So as painful as this may be, maybe it's not, but I know that it's physical as you talk about it. The gratitude I have that you're willing to do so.
Thank you.
Let's talk about something else.
Please.
One of your legacies is back amongst all this, this journey you've been on, is Flight 1.
Sure.
Which has absolutely saved countless lives by the education that's provided, and is really the gold standard in canopy training. And you're a co-founder of that. And I would say a dear friend of mine is Scott Miller. In my early days, I used to hire Scott to come to my drop zone, and I have never had a superficial conversation with Scott. That guy is depth, honesty, salt of the earth, good people.
Agreed.
I'll get to my question. Could you have imagined what you all established then, that it could possibly be what it is today?
Yes. It's not an accident. It didn't just happen. We set clear goals, absolutely stated what we wanted to do, with intention and clarity, and we've been working very hard for a very long time to achieve them.
I imagine you must feel like so proud of that business.
It's fun. It's funny is that the answer is yes, but because of my perfectionism and my strive mentality, is I always see so much more to do. But the answer is yes. I am incredibly proud of everybody in the Flight One organization for all of the work that they do around the world to contribute to making canopy piloting and skydiving a safer endeavor for those that choose to do it.
This podcast is sponsored by Beyond Marketing, the digital marketing agency for the skydiving industry. Now, I'm not a fan of lots of ads during a podcast. I mean, who likes ads? So I'll stop talking about how marvelously wonderful Beyond Marketing is. But if you're curious about what the amazing people of Beyond Marketing do to help drop zones and manufacturers thrive, then you should check out their website at dropzone.marketing. That's dropzone.marketing. Today, Moledzki, today you're in Moab, Utah. What makes you happy?
That's a great question. I am a deep lover of nature. Nature brings me a lot of peace, and I would consider peace and happiness congruent. The two things kind of need to live together. So later today, I'll be outside hiking up a beautiful mountain and flying off of it, and that brings me much joy, as do the friendships that I engage in those endeavors. Family is right at the top of my list. I've chosen most of my family, and I make a very intentional effort on a daily basis to stay in close contact with those people that are dear to me, and I love them.
I saw a social media post from you recently. It appears that you're in a Sprinter van or something of that nature.
Yeah.
And you're next to a creek, and there's like a sheep. It's just simply
Idaho. Yeah.
It is in Idaho. And it's just eating a little grass next to a little creek. And, you start making sheep noises, sort of neighing at it or whatever the sheep noise term is for that. And I felt joy.
Life can be simple. I want to say one other thing, because this is a very important skill that I have learned. You said, what makes you happy? Lifting weights literally makes my brain happy. I don't like lifting weights. I don't like going to the gym. Lifting weights makes me happy. That's the outcome of resistance training, is that my brain chemistry makes me feel happier. So if anybody's wondering, how do I address my own happiness? It's freaking easy. Go lift weights and you'll feel better afterwards.
Yeah. It's interesting. I have befriended a guy named Jacques Estelle. I don't know if you know Jacques.
I don't.
He's technically D2 on a coin flip with Lou Sanborn, and
Gotcha.
Lou was D1.
Mm-hmm.
And Jacques established the first civilian drop zone in the 50s. Still alive today, 97 or 8. He swims every day of his life. Every morning he swims. And to say that he's 97 or 98, his whole mental outlook is so positive. And he attributes his longevity and mental health to just moving every day. And that's when you said that made me think of an OG skydiver, one of the most OG there is.
Totally.
What does a day typically look like for you?
Most days I've set up my life so that I can wake naturally. I don't use an alarm clock. I'm very easy on myself in the mornings because it's a tender time for me. My body needs I need adequate sleep in order to feel good. So I ease into the day with structure and routine. I make my bed first thing every single morning right away. And I move into a high protein breakfast, hydration routine, supplements. Takes me an hour to an hour and a half in the morning to get myself ready. And I'm either sitting down to the computer to get to work on a project, usually something like this, in conversation about growth, or working on one of my many businesses. And then by 12:30, I'd like to be out the door, moving, getting outside. I usually open the door right away and let in a flood of fresh air and go outside as soon as I'm out of bed. And I try to fly 4 or 5 days a week, hike 4 or 5 days a week, go to the gym 3-4 days a week. And then I'm back into resting mode by 5 o'clock or so. Something most people don't know is I've been struggling with Lyme disease for quite some time now. And it's really had an effect on my mental and physical health. And so I've had to restructure my life to give a lot more grace to my physical body because I run out of steam really quick and I can't really hang as long as I used to anymore. So
that's a word that resonates a lot with me, is grace.
Yeah.
God, we're so hard on ourselves, we're such big critics. I don't give myself grace, but I offer that advice to a lot of people that when I speak with them and they are being so hard, like, give yourself some grace.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. I saw a video of you the other day doing a tandem paraglide. And that really struck me because when I associate tandem instructors, if you will, I often think of an expression that I loathe, which is hucking meat or, I really do loathe that because of the impact you have on the opportunity you have to have an impact on someone's life. And what made me feel happy in looking at that video is you were really enjoying it.
Yeah. I love flying.
Clearly, and sharing this world with, here's the thing, right? Like, you could be jaded. And this, is a business which has a means to an end. At least there's a financial component, but it never, in my observation, is not transactional. It's like the sage warrior who's been through it now gets to do what he fought against the whole time, which was not doing tandems, which was just a self, going after the prophecy of being the world champion. And now, on the other side, sharing the joy of flight. It was awesome to see.
It's full circle. I did tandems when I was in my 20s as one of my means of supporting myself financially. And it was never what I wanted to do with the sport. And nor is it what I want to do with my paragliding career. But it is definitely a means to foster community and to show other people the sky. Somebody showed me the sky, right? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to those people, to Joe Chow for Skydive Toronto, who showed me the sky so that I could have this life. And I'm very lucky to say that I've shown many people the sky throughout my 30 years in the sport. And I look forward to the opportunity to show many more what the sky is like in these new endeavors with Paraglide Moab.
Just in closing, there's a comment I wanted to say earlier. And that was to say that you've had learning disabilities in your journey. I find you incredibly well read. And one thing that really jumped out at me was a really small detail, was when you were starting to skydive, that you read Dan Pointer's books.
Yeah.
And
I don't
know, very seldom do skydivers read books. They just go through the process and learn as they go. And more than once I've heard, it sounds like you're a reader. Like, you really do consume a lot of information.
I'm an avid consumer of education, of knowledge, of experience. I remember I'm a pre-internet kid, right? So if you want to learn something, you go to the library, right? And when I signed up for that skydive, I went to the library. I found 2 books on skydiving, First Jump Handbook and Dan Pointer's book, and read them both cover to cover. So when and same thing when I made my first base jump, I learned a base jump on the internet, but I showed up to my first bridge day jump and I'm like, I think I've got this all figured out already based on what I've studied. And I've always liked to be that way, and whether it's the study, I've got a whole rack of library. I just got a storage, which is so nice to be able to have my library here again. And so I've got dozens and dozens of books on psychedelics and consciousness and quantum physics and mathematics and sacred geometry and all the things that I've come to understand are the keys to the universe itself. Yeah.
Amazing. JayMo, if anybody wants to engage with you, how do they do that?
Instagram is a great place to reach out to me. Jason_Moledzki. You can also get to me at the Trusted Journey page as well, trustedjourney.today. When you want to go paragliding, Paraglide Moab. Yeah.
I appreciate your generosity in sharing your story. so deeply personal. I almost feel as an interviewer for this podcast, like, who am I to be able to ask these questions? And, I feel, gosh, not many people would open up the way that you have, but you are an inspiration, and you inspire me, not for any gold medal you ever won.
Thanks, James. Fact is, I'm going to be dead in a very short amount of time in the big picture, right? All of us are. We got so many years. We have the chance right now to be the full version of ourselves, or we can be the edited version, which doesn't really show everybody who we are. And we can all think of people who have edited themselves to us, and we wish we had more of their story. So this is my encouragement to others and example to others to just go ahead and tell your story as it is, because fuck it, you're going to die and nobody's going to care in 50 years anyways.
There's not going to be a person, I think, certainly this is the case for me, where I will leave this podcast and there will be words from it that will churn in me, just as they did the last time you and I spoke at PIA a year odd ago. You have an aura about you, JayMo. It's powerful. It's palpable. You walk into a room, I'm aware of your presence, and you use it for good. And I'm very grateful for that. I know that a lot of folks listening are going to gain from our conversation.
Thanks.
And so I thank you.
Thanks very much. I appreciate you, James. And follow us on Trust the Journey.
Great podcast.
Yeah, come engage with us at Trust the Journey. I'd love to be engaging this community more and more there. So
cheers.
Thanks, James. Yeah.
Thank you, Jamie. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for listening to the 20-Minute Call podcast. Please do follow us on your podcast app so you always have the latest episode, which is released every Monday. If you want to contact the team, our email address is podcast@beyondmarketing.xyz. This episode was edited and engineered by Garnet Znydrick of the YouTube channel Blue Skies Fun Days. Thanks for listening, and join us next week for our next episode.